Not even 2 weeks after the BC government made a major announcement about changes to tenancy regulations, they went ahead and did it again. But will these new changes make a bigger mess or actually have a positive impact? Stay tuned to find out. What's going on, guys? My name's Alex Dunbar and I make videos just like this one every single week pertaining to the BC and Canadian real estate market, as well as showcasing community tours across the Lower Mainland. So if that's something you're interested in seeing more of, I suggest you consider subscribing to our channel. With all the commotion as of late, with several changes occurring from both the provincial and federal level that impacts housing, could this most recent one actually be the smartest thing they've done? Just a few weeks ago, on July 18th, 2024, the province implemented rules that required landlords to provide a full 4 months of notice if they were taking back a property for personal use, which also includes if a new buyer is purchasing. This was changed from the previous minimum notice, which was 2 full months, and there was a massive outcry from both landlords and the real estate industry alike. The reason being is how much of a negative impact it would have not only on individuals looking to sell their homes, but also on first-time buyers being able to purchase these properties, and whether they know it or not, the negative impacts that it was going to have on tenants. So what the BC government has actually gone and done is amended that change that they just made and made it into 3 months notice instead of 4 months. However, this is only for home purchasers. If you're already living in the house or moving back into the house and already own it, it's still going to be a minimum of 4 months. And for once, I'm actually pleasantly surprised. It's not often I say this, but they actually got this one right. However, they could have just got it right from the start. When it was originally announced that this would be coming in the future, the government went ahead and did this without consulting industry professionals who actually have an understanding of how this would impact the market. So essentially, before it was even launched, and then especially after it was, there was a ton of feedback provided to the government, who quickly realized that, well, they made a big mistake. So I'm just gonna go ahead and quickly go through the notice that the BC government actually released so we can see exactly what they said. So here we can see the notice. Personal use notice period for home buyers is changing. So I'm not gonna go through this line by line. However, the province is amending the personal use notice for home purchasers in BC to 3 months to improve conditions for first-time buyers while ensuring tenants have more than 2 months notice to find new housing, as mentioned. So that essentially just sums that up as well. Since the amendments came into force, government has listened to feedback from industry stakeholders that a 4-month notice period could prevent first-time buyers from purchasing tenanted property, particularly those under the CMHC programs, which require the property to have vacant possession. And so not only this, but to actually get a full mortgage approval, you need to have it within 90 to 120 days afterwards. If we're talking 4 months, this means that the majority of people are actually going to be closer to 5 months. The reason being is that, let's take August 5th, for example. If you're to provide notice, given the rules prior to changing, for 4 full months, all of August does not count. It doesn't start until September. So that means September, October, November, December. You're looking at January 1st as the earliest that you can take possession of this property. So now, not only can you not actually get fully approved for that mortgage prior to removing your subjects and going firm on the deal, but also that is a significant period of time. That is way, way more than enough time for a tenant to find a new property. And honestly, people just don't want to purchase those properties anymore because of that fact. And we'll get to that in a bit here, but let's continue on. In addition, a 4-month notice period may not align with the purchaser's mortgage commitment, as mentioned, which could expire prior to the closing date, which is exactly what I was saying. There is a CMHC requirement that purchasers with insured mortgages take possession upon closing, which requires vacancy of the property. So basically, you can't purchase with mortgage insurance or mortgage default insurance as a investor, right? So you're always gonna have to put 20% down, which allows you to avoid this. And as a first time, while you don't even have to necessarily be a first time home buyer, you could actually be somebody who's just purchasing a property for under $1 million, because the down payment requirements are based on purchase price and use of the property, and not whether you're a first time home buyer or not. But the extended notice period could have an impact on this requirement and potentially disqualify them from financing, again, as I mentioned. So this is actually going to come back and take effect on August 21st, 2024, which is hilarious because once again, it was not even 2 weeks after they implemented these changes that they went and backtracked and realized the mistakes that they made. And unfortunately, in the past, they've done some similar things with the home buyer's rescission period or cooling off period, as you may know it as there was a ton of industry consults stating that this isn't a good idea, it's going to complicate things, it's not actually going to help anything, and they went ahead and did it anyways instead of taking the advice. And realistically, it has been a big nothing burger, hasn't had any impact, and they actually also implemented it after it was too late, after the hot markets were already over and things were slowed down and there was really no need for it. But I digress, that's not what this video is about. However, on that topic, it just doesn't make sense that they're not consulting the industry, at least taking some sort of advice or consultation from a factual perspective have an impact, right? Because unfortunately, anyways, I don't want to get too carried away with this, but the government says a lot of things that sound nice at surface level, but when you actually look at the fundamental impacts, they are not aligned whatsoever. So there was a few other changes in terms of landlords who intend to personally move into the rental property or have a close family member move in are still required to give 4 months, as mentioned, if they are issuing notice to end tenancy. Tenants of these properties will also have 30 days to dispute the landlord's NTES. The person moving into the home must occupy it for a minimum of 12 months, and landlords who evict in bad faith could be ordered to pay the displaced tenant 12 months rent. So I actually completely understand and agree with why they're doing this. The reason being is that if the tenant is evicted unfaithfully, they're going to be compensated for 12 months. However, there are, again, very few landlords. However, I have heard of these very few circumstances where they're treating it essentially like a business, just looking at the numbers, which again, it is a business to an extent, but they are people at the end of the day, and it has to be run in a correct and ethical way, right? The same as a business does. It still has to be ethical, but it is numbers based. So if that individual, let's say, was paying $1,000 under market value for their rent, and the owner knows they can get an extra $1,000, well, if you kick them out, essentially, let's say, pay them $12,000 because they're only paying $1,000, but you can raise that to $2,000 afterwards, then in month 13, you're actually then profitable, and it's obviously going to make a massive difference for them, especially with where interest rates and costs and everything else are. But I digress. So again, this is apparently going to be going to 24 months. I'm not against that whatsoever, because I think it will prevent people from doing this, because then it will be even more difficult in order to, make those numbers work or be profitable per se. So not against that. It sounds like there are more changes coming down the pipeline. We will just have to see what those are. One of the interesting parts about how all this policy was written up for some of the changes in the future was actually that the government no longer has to go through the typical hearing process or necessarily even get consultation in regards to any changes that they want to make. They can basically just say, we want to implement this now, and it doesn't have to go through hearings or anything else. So the funny part about this is they actually essentially use this for good in this case, because this amendment was made without having to, again, consult or go through hearings or anything else. They're able to just implement it, but this is a very scary thing if they're doing it on the other side of things, because who knows what they're going to do. Again, they just have too much power, and we don't really have a say in where they go about with that, and especially with the election coming up and everything else. But you know what, for now, I'm happy with how they use that policy, but honestly, it's something you got to keep your eye out for in the future, because they can basically just make a change like that, and it could be put upon you in no time. So I'd like to go a little bit deeper onto why it was such a good reason that they actually made this change, on top of the things that I've already mentioned. So number one, and probably the biggest thing, is that if you talk to a large majority of landlords, and unfortunately there's not really any sort of data that we can pull this from, it is more subjective, based on conversations, based on comments, based on talking to those in the industry and landlords and property managers and everything else, is that more and more people are choosing not to invest in real estate in BC, and not only just invest, but if somebody owns a home, let's say they've owned it for 10, 15, 20 years, and they have a small mortgage or potentially no mortgage, and they have 1 basement suite or potentially 2 basement suites. Because of the way that the rules have changed and how heavily they are favoring tenants at this point in time, these people are just choosing not to rent out their basement suites because of the high level of risk. Because with any investment, you have risk versus reward. And if the risk is too high and the reward is not good enough, people don't invest. Now, unfortunately, what does that mean? Less rental housing. Less rental housing means less options, supply and demand, prices are gonna go up, you're gonna have less to choose from. And when people think that this is gonna crash the market or anything else of this nature, unfortunately, I have news for you. It's not. It may put some pressure onto the condo market, for instance, in certain circumstances, because it's going to make those properties harder to sell, which we're seeing at this point in time. However, with this new change, which makes that at least a little bit more feasible and reasonable, it shouldn't have any sort of substantial impact. However, the other side of the coin as well is that it's making it less and less attractive for investors to purchase pre-sale. Now, you might be thinking, well, why is that an issue? Why does that matter? Well, in order to actually get a pre-sale off the ground, if you don't know this, they typically need about 70% of the funding in order to get the loan. That's why it's called a pre-sale, because they're not able to go out and get these funds and start building the project prior to actually knowing whether or not it's going to sell, which is good for them in a sense, of course, but at the same time, where's that money going to come from? Where's that financing going to come from? First-time buyers and individuals, the majority of people aren't wanting to put a deposit down into this project and not actually take possession of it for 2, 3, 4 years, right? Without an actual specific date or deadline where they're going to get the property, because there's fluctuations and that timeline can change based on a number of factors. It's just not the large part of the market that is investing there. So we need investors to get projects off the ground. Of course, again, they are taking risk when they're putting their money into this. We've seen this with people who bought back in 2021, 2022 in certain projects. They're trying to flip these units right now because they didn't actually have the intention of renting them out. And these are people that I'm not against getting out of there, right? Like, I would never advise a client just to purchase a pre-sale unit with the sole intention of flipping it before the contract completed, the unit completed, and they would actually put a tenant in there. That's supposed to be a backup or secondary option. The primary goal should be to complete on the property, move in yourself, or have a renter rent that property from you, and then down the line you have the ability to potentially sell it or whatever that may be. If the numbers look good, great, assign that unit, right? But if you don't even have the ability to complete on that from the start, like you just have $50,000 that you dump into this condo that you don't need to actually qualify for the mortgage, and you're just thinking, which this is a lot of people, partially based off of poor advice, partially based off of speculation, partially based off of lack of education, but they never had the ability to close. Their whole entire focus was, we're gonna put 50K down, prices are gonna go up 100 grand in the next 2 years, we're gonna flip that, we're gonna assign the unit, and we're just gonna count our cash. And that is a terrible way to invest. As I said, great backup plan. If things go well, cherry on top, but that can't be the way that you're going about things, and people are feeling that pain now. But guess what? The good news is that those people who lost money or didn't make money or whatever that may be, they took the risk on, they still were able to build these projects, which means more housing. So it's a win, right? It's a win because we actually get more housing. It's being passed on to end users now who are purchasing these units, and they're getting a discount. However, you need to have some level of incentive to get people to purchase these pre-sales. So yes, there is the potential that it could be a good investment. There's also the potential that right now, like we're seeing with these people, that they lost money. And that's just how the market works. Unfortunately, there is no perfect safeguard where the government's gonna just like hand us all this housing and everybody's just gonna get to, you know, purchase a condo at $200,000, and it's just not the way the world works, unfortunately. So we need investors. They are important for actually having housing built. We need a rental market. Just because there's not investors doesn't necessarily mean that all this housing is going to be way cheaper, more affordable, and everyone's going to be able to buy it. Number one, not everyone wants to be a homeowner. Some people like renting. Maybe they want the flexibility, or honestly, right now, rent costs are lower than mortgage payments, right? Or at least when you take everything into account. You got mortgage payments, you've got strata fees if it's a condo, property taxes, dependent on if your tenant is paying the utilities or yourself. There is repairs, there's so many other things. Yes, you are building equity in the home, but if we're just looking at straight up costs and we're not taking into account everything else on a monthly basis, rent's gonna be cheaper. And that's what people tend to forget sometimes, that somebody who's purchasing a rental property right now is typically subsidizing your rent. If they're paying $3,000, $3,500 a month and you're paying them $2,500, they're having to cover that extra $1,000. And there's too many people that think, oh, well, they're just greedy landlords and all this other stuff. Well, if they weren't there, what would you be renting, right? Like, they're providing the supply, which is needed. And the more supply, the more we can actually bring these costs down. But anyways, I digress. We need to find this common middle ground where tenants don't think landlords are all bad and landlords don't think all tenants are bad. But the BC government needs to give a little bit more power back to landlords, or we're basically going to start to continue to lose this market. And it's going to be losses on both sides. It's going to be more difficult for people to rent, prices are going to go up, less options, and there's going to be less people who are willing to rent out their properties, again, whether that's a basement suite or an actual condo or something of that nature. And we need this, right? We need it. We're in a housing crisis, things are expensive, so there needs to be more of a level playing field. But that's about it. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you think that we're headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? Was this change from the 4 months notice to 3 months notice needed? And is it a good thing? Or should we just not have given landlords back any sort of power? Anyways, hopefully you got some value and enjoyed this video. I'd love it if you could smash that like button so I can get this information out to more individuals just like yourself that want to learn more about real estate. And if you are looking to buy, sell, or invest in my marketplace of Surrey, Langley, and the rest of the Fraser Valley, or you just want to chat about real estate, you can scroll down and click the first link in the description to book a call with me at a time that works best for you. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you check out another video on my channel before you get out of here, and we'll see you in the next video.